Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Colden Company's webinar on combating phishing. My name is Jim Lapointe. All attendees are in listen-only mode right now. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A or chat boxes in WebEx, and I will get to those at the end of the presentation. So without further ado here, let's jump right in and look at our first slide here, which is just to talk a little bit about Colden Company for those of you that aren't familiar with us. We are an information technology service organization founded in 2003, so we're computer guys and gals. We have offices located in St. Augustine, Florida, which is where I'm talking to you from today, as well as in Ballston Spa, New York. Our customer footprint extends out into about 16 different states, as well as 3 countries outside the U.S. And we have many leading technical certifications. Most recently, we were given a certification from Microsoft for cloud competency in their silver competency for cloud services. But for the purposes of today's webinar, we have a security certification from CompTIA. Okay, so what is our agenda for today? First of all, we're going to define what is phishing. What are we talking about here? We're going to give you some examples of some phishing emails that we've seen. And then we'll get into the good stuff here. We'll talk about how to limit your business risk. And then we'll address any questions at the end. We'll try to keep it to 30 to 40 minutes tops here today. Okay? All right, so let's dive right in here. What is phishing? So phishing emails are emails that pretend to be from one source, but are really from another. It's important to note that phishing is illegal. It falls under identity theft because really the person that's sending the email is purporting to be somebody that they're not. So it falls under identity theft. Hackers will often use a tactic called email spoofing, which makes it appear as though the email is from that specific person when it's really not. And of course, the goal of these phishing emails is to trick the receiver of the email into giving up personal information. So that's what they're after. They're sending you this email with a purpose. That purpose is to get you to give up something, whether that is some type of banking information, if it's just a username and password. So the sender of that email is always after something. Okay, so this slide is, if you needed any more proof that tech people are geeky, this slide will prove that to you. There's also many variants of phishing. There's something called vishing with a V, which is voice call phishing. Most of the time, those are automated calls. They don't have to be. They could be an actual person on the other line, but it could be a voice call saying, "This is American Express, and we believe that your account has been compromised. Please enter your PIN code," or excuse me, or something like that, where you're still trying to get information from you. There's also smishing, which is SMS texting. I apologize for my voice here. I got a little bit of a cold today. The same purpose. You'll get some type of a link in a text message where it's prompting you for some type of information. Then we have something called spear phishing, which is a targeted phishing attack. So instead of the bad guys just blanket sending out a million emails, they're going after a specific company. So the email tends to be a little bit more targeted to that business. And that's why it's called spear phishing. So they're going with a much more narrow net than the broad net. And finally, they have something called whale phishing, where they're targeting C-level executives at a business, typically the financial people, right? They want to get to the people that have access to the purse strings. So that's called whale phishing. Okay. Did you know that 91% of data breaches are the result of a successful phishing attack? And I don't know about you, but when I read that statistic, I had the reaction of our friend here in the lower corner. Shocking, right? 91% of data breaches start off as a phishing attack. So as a business, where do you want to put your focus in terms of safeguarding your data? This certainly looks like a good place to put it, right? If 91% of data breaches are the result of phishing, maybe that's something you ought to look into preventing. Also important to note that phishing attacks are becoming much more difficult to detect. And if you receive our blog post, you probably read one a couple months ago where we talked about today's phishing attacks are not your father's phishing attacks. They're not the same ones that you saw years ago. Much more difficult to detect. And here I've got an example. Can you tell the difference between the top one and the bottom one, google.com and google.com? And this one ought to really make your jaw drop. So what hackers are doing now, they have something called an IDN homograph attack. And what that really is they're using different alphabets to create technically different URLs or different things to click on, but they look just like the English language. So the Cyrillic alphabet and the Greek alphabet have characters that look very similar to our O. So in this example here, you've got google.com with O's, and the second one, they're Cyrillic characters that look like O's, but they're actually a different alphabet that they're using to trick people into clicking on it. There's no way to tell. If you look at that, they look exactly the same. That is a very difficult attack to detect. So we're going to talk about ways to combat that. One quick tactic is if you get an email and you think it's legitimate, instead of clicking on the link, go to whatever site it is directly. Go to google.com directly. Go to americanexpress.com or Chase or whatever it happens to be. Go directly to that site rather than clicking the link. Okay. The next slide here, they've created an entirely new classification of phishing emails called business email compromise attacks, or BEC attacks. And those are very much on the rise this year, 55% increase just so far in 2018. And these are a serious risk to your business and to your contacts, and let me explain that. So the way this works is the phishing email goes out with the purpose of trying to get the email credentials of somebody in the business. So we're going to show you some examples of what they look like, but they're going to send that email and try to trick someone in your organization into putting their email address and password in. Once the bad guys have that, then the fun begins. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to download that person's mailbox and contacts, and they're going to sift through that. And what they're looking for communication with your payroll company. They're looking for communication with the bank or your customers or vendors, anybody that they might be able to extort money out of. So let's say they've done that. They've identified one of your customers that they're going to go after. What they'll do is they're going to, now that they have access to your mailbox or that user's mailbox, they have control over it. They're going to set up rules that forward messages from the person they're attacking. In this case, we're talking about your customer. They're going to forward them off to the hacker and then delete them out of your mailbox so that you never actually see them as the person who's been compromised. And then they're going to start a communication with this customer that they're wanting to compromise and use your email address to do it. And they're going to send an email out that says, hey, you owe us on this invoice. It's past due. Please click here to pay it, and try to extort your customer that way. They're going to go after your payroll company. Hey, we just hired a new person as a 1099. We got to get their first paycheck to them. Send it, wire it to this account. They're going to go after your bank. They're going to go after your vendors, all under your name. So you can see how this can be a very serious risk to your business and also to the people that you do business with. Okay, so that's one we wanted to hit hard here. Let's take a look at some examples of some phishing emails. Okay, hello, good sir. My name is Rajesh Thrantagili, and I'm thrilled to meet you. I'm a Nigerian prince. This is a joke. This is not the kind of attack that we're seeing. This is something you might have seen 10 years ago, right? Where it's pretty obvious. I don't think I've got a cousin in Nigeria. I'm not going to give him my bank account information, and I'm probably not going to get half of $10 million here to split. That is not today's example. So I put this up here basically to say, gone are the days, and this is what you're going to see as an example of a phishing email. Here's one that you're more likely going to see. I'm an Office 365 user, and I've got a message from Microsoft saying that failed to sync some of my incoming messages. I have to validate my account here to get those. Well, if you're particularly astute, you're going to notice that this URL down here, get into boating, gee, that doesn't really make much sense, right? That should be a red flag that this is not a legit email. If I were to click on that link, I guarantee you what it would be asking me for is my email password. If I've given that up, they've got my email address, now they've got my password, I've just opened the floodgates for this hacker. So you've got to be aware of those things. Other things up here, Office 0365, that's not quite right. Those are all things that should tip you off as a receiver of email that this may not be legitimate. Look at one more. Okay, again, targeting Office 365 because they know a lot of the world out there has moved to Office 365 as an email platform. So they're blasting out messages that look like they're coming from Microsoft, hoping that a good portion of those people are actually on 365 and might fall for that. So here they're saying that, geez, my subscription has expired. I need to renew that and click here. Guarantee you, clicking that, they're going to be asking for my credentials and, again, compromising my email. I've circled up here that you can see this is coming from a foreign email address. Again, that should be a tip-off that this is not legitimate. So just as a general rule of thumb here, any type of email that is looking to get your credentials, be very, very, very wary of. Do not trust those. Ask a lot of questions. Think before you click. There's a lot of these going around, and in general, anything that's asking for usernames and passwords, be very, very skeptical of. Okay, so we've defined phishing. We've shown you some examples. What are we going to do to defend against it? Well, let's start with the obvious here. You need to have a reputable spam filter. So phishing attacks primarily come through email. You want your provider to be able to fish those out and block the majority of those. So if you're using a reputable email service like Microsoft or Google, chances are you've already got a quality spam filter. Google bought a company called Postini years ago that was really the gold standard for spam filtering and integrated that into their G Suite product. Very good spam filtering. Microsoft's Office 365. This one, it depends. They don't give everyone the same spam filtering. So it really depends on what tier you've got. If you're on one of Microsoft's enterprise tiers, they have something called Advanced Threat Protection that they include in those higher E5 and up tiers that does a really good job of this. If you're not running one of those upper tiers and you're running one of the lower end tiers, it's not as good. And we've found that a lot of these phishing emails are making it through Microsoft's spam filter. So that's something to be aware of. There's also third-party spam filtering that you can tack on to pretty much any email system. We're partial to a company called Proofpoint. Proofpoint was a spam filtering provider to the Fortune 500. So they were providing spam filtering for Walmart and General Electric and a lot of the big dogs. And probably 5 or 6 years ago, they decided to get into the small, medium-sized business space. And we were pretty thrilled to see that. They have a really excellent engine that really catches a lot of stuff, and that can be applied on top of any of these solutions at a pretty reasonable point cost as well. Okay. If you're not using one of the major email providers, you definitely want to be looking at, what have I got for spam filtering? Is it good enough? Is it reputable? Okay, next step people can take is to set something that are called SPF records, or Sender Policy Framework. Really what these records do is define who is allowed to send email on behalf of your domain. So for me at Colden Company, I'm going to set Google or Microsoft, so whichever, we actually use both here, and any other systems that might send email on behalf of us. We have a ERP system that sends email, so I have to define these are places that are okay, or we say are okay, to send email on behalf of Colden Company. The problem with sending the SPF records is if the receiver is not checking SPF records, then it really doesn't do any good. And unfortunately, while this is becoming more widely adopted, it's not fully adopted out there. So setting SPF records, while it does some good, is not an end-all be-all solution here. So it's important to note that there's really a couple of steps here. You can set the SPF records for your domain, and then part two is you're checking incoming mail. You're checking the SPF records for mail that's coming in. And you're receiving mail from one of your customers, as an example. You're going to go out and check their domain to make sure that that's coming from a source that they say is legitimate. So there's two steps really to that. Moving on, hardening your email service. One thing that we like to do is disable auto forwarding of emails outside of your domain, so that if one of our customers, let's say one of their employees, falls for one of those phishing scams, they give away their credentials, the hacker is not going to be able to auto forward all of their mail outside of the domain. So that's a good step to take. Of course, you want to take regular precautions like encrypting email for sensitive information. Two-factor authentication is a great thing to implement for your email. For those of you that are not familiar with two-factor authentication, just a regular username and password isn't going to cut it to get into your account. So if you've ever logged into a banking site and it sends you a text message with a code to complete the login process, that's what we're talking about with two-factor authentication. So Google, the way they do it is if you're logging in from a known site, so if they see, okay, you always log in here, I'm not going to ask you for that second factor. But if you try to log in from a place that's unknown to them, they prompt you for that two-factor. That's also a great way to keep your email account secure. Okay, policies. Always want to have good documented policies in place, particularly pertaining to wire transfers. That's what a lot of these hackers are going after your business and other businesses to try to get money, right? Any type of an email that's asking you to wire money quickly should raise a red flag. And as a business, you should have some type of validation process in place with multiple parties before any wire transfers go out. You also want to make sure you've got policies in your company handbook for your regular employees, and preferably some type of a sign-off process where they've read and understood your policies. That's going to protect you as a business. So this is an area where we see a lot of folks really should beef up their documented policies, and we can help with that. And we also have user education. According to the FBI, they listed us, users, as the #1 weakness in cybersecurity. You can have all the security in the world, but if one of your employees gives away passwords and opens the door for the bad guys, all that security is for naught, essentially. So there's security awareness training where you educate employees on the risks that are out there, the types of attack that they're likely to see. Those things go a long way towards protecting your business. Another service that we offer here at Colden Company is phishing simulations. So the way that works is we would send out emails that look like some common and current phishing emails that we're seeing, like the ones we showed you in our example, and basically see who falls for it, see who those clickers are. Because really, those people that are doing the clicking are the ones that are putting your business at risk. And every business has them. I don't care what size business you are. You could send an email out with a skull and crossbones, do not click, danger, danger, and you know somebody's going to click on it. And those are the people that you need to target with your training and your education. And that's what our phishing simulations will do, is they'll identify those people and then give them remedial training to help them recognize why that was not a legitimate email and improve security by education that way. Okay, so Colden Company, we have a service that actually combines those last 2 points together. It has security awareness training. You can choose from a number of different videos. We tend to go with a 25-minute introductory training video just for people to be aware of what's out there and what to be on the lookout for. There are longer ones. There's 45 minutes, so it's really up to you as a customer to pick which one you want. And then we do the phishing simulation. We do that multiple times a year, keep people on their toes, and then offer the remedial training for those people that are clickers. So we found this to be pretty effective. We've got over 2,500 different phishing email templates. You can choose if you want. We usually start with something that's a little more basic, a little bit easier, and see who really is out of touch. And then as you go on, you can refine your simulated emails to be a little bit more tricky and really kind of help your employees up their game on what they're clicking on and what they're not. Okay, a couple of statistics for you here. 48% of small business organizations that have experienced a security incident in the last 2 years attributed that to human error. And by human error, we're talking about our clickers here, somebody that's clicking on something they shouldn't. 48%, pretty high number. Another statistic here, an anti-phishing company did a study, and they found that susceptibility to those phishing emails immediately drops 20% after the very first simulation test. Gets people thinking, gets them on their toes, and that number continues to drop the more you do it. What happens if you just do the test once? You do get that 20% improvement, but then over time, people kind of slide back into their tendencies. By doing the testing regularly, it's keeping people on their toes, so to speak. Another part of that study that I want to point out here is B2C, or business to consumer industries, tend to have higher click rates on phishing emails. So if you're a business that is used to dealing with the general public, you're probably a little bit more used to getting emails from people you don't know, and you're more inclined to be clicking on those because those emails could potentially be business, right? The B2B folks tend to have a little bit lower click rate because they tend to have more of the usual contacts that they're working with. So if you are in retail or some type of B2C business, bear in mind that your folks tend to have higher click rates on those phishing emails. Okay, according to the National Law Review, employee training is one of the least expensive and most effective tools that an organization can use to reduce risk. And obviously, we're pretty high on the service that we have that combines the phishing and the user training. That's proven to be pretty effective here. But let me tell you what we see most often here. Most of the folks that we're talking with, head in the sand, right? It's not going to happen to me until it does. We're not seeing people taking these threats seriously enough. And the risks are real. The consequences are real when people click on something. And you want to make sure that your folks are educated on what those risks and those consequences are. So we don't want you to be a victim. We want you to be prepared and protected. If you've worked with Colden Company for very long, you've heard this saying before. If you're running your business the same way you were 3 or 4 years ago, you're not staying the same, you're falling behind. And that's because other things change. And we originally put this quote together talking about technology, where your competition isn't staying pat. They're moving forward with things. They're improving. They're getting better. If you're doing things the same way, you're not really staying still. You're falling behind. And this is particularly true with security. The threats that are out there today are not the same threats that were out there 3 or 4 years ago. And we showed you some examples. They're much more difficult to detect. They're much more damaging. So therefore, your defenses have to be up to date. And it's unfortunate, but just last week, I got a phone call from a company, not a customer of ours, but they were unfortunately clicked on something they shouldn't have in an email and unleashed a ransomware virus. It encrypted everything on their server, went out and encrypted their backup, which was on an external hard drive, really putting them in a bad situation. So these things do happen, and they do happen in real life here. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to open it up for some questions here. I did see a couple things tick in here. I'm also going to put up our contact information on the screen. So if you'd like to hear more or know more, our phone number is up on the screen there, 888-600-4560, and my email is on the screen as well. I'm extension 102. My email is jiml@coldencompany.com. So let me take a quick look at what we've got here. How do you spoof an email address? So it looks like we have a hacker on the line here today. That's illegal, so I'm not going to encourage that. Unfortunately, it's very easy to do. Trying to figure out a nice way to answer this question. There are easy ways to change, for example, the reply address of an email. Those things are relatively easy to do. There's different levels of spoofing emails where you can change the name, but the address is still a third-party address, or you can get really sophisticated and make it very difficult to detect. So I guess there's different levels to spoofing email addresses. I will say that some of the methods are incredibly easy to do, but I'm not going to share details on that. Okay, let's move on to another one. Why won't your phishing emails be flagged and dropped? Well, that's a very good question. And before we would start any testing, what we would do is whitelist the address that our spoofing emails are going to be coming from, so that your spam filter knows, okay, these are legitimate emails and they're not going to be blocked because we've gone through that measure of actually whitelisting them. But a very good question. And those are the only two that came in. Is there any other questions out there? If so, feel free to tap them in now. If not, I'd like to thank everybody for taking time out of their day today to listen to us. And again, we're here to help. We want people to be prepared and not become victims. So anything we can do to help, please feel free to reach out to us. And everyone, please have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.